Hi, I'm Kirsten DeMello, and welcome to the Spiritist Moment. And today we have a very special co-host,
Leonardo Vieira.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Leo.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to have you. Today we're going to be studying a very special chapter, as all chapters in the book Gospel According to Spiritism, Chapter 3, that's entitled, There Are Many Dwellings in My Father's House. Excellent chapter that touches on something that Jesus talked about when Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many mansions. Very interesting stuff today that I think we're going to be discussing, don't you think, Leo?
Most certainly, yes.
And one of the first things we're going to be discussing is a topic that Kardec calls the different states of the soul in the errant state. And for those of you who are wondering, what is the errant state? It does give a definition right below on the page. I will read it for you. It says, the intervals between reincarnations while the spirit is in the spirit world awaiting a new destiny. So Kardec talks about this. What are the different states? Leo, what do you, from Kardec's teachings here, and he shares with us these different states, this errant state, what do you understand from reading it? Because Kardec talks about, as he says here, the Father's house is the universe, the different dwellings are the worlds that revolve in infinite space, offering to incarnate spirits stations to appropriate to their advancement. And then he goes into talk about the different levels of spirits, right, that exist, whether you're quote-unquote good or bad, have more understanding or less understanding. What does Kardec say about these different errant states, the spirit in the errant state?
A basic understanding that we can, or perhaps a knowledge that we can bring to the discussion is the analyzation of a community, perhaps a state or a country, where we see different groups of people that or different locations within that community, within that state or that country, as we mentioned, that is a little bit more evolved. Evolved in the sense of you see prettier places, and then you see locations that are not so well evolved, they're not so well planned, and we see the same thing happening throughout throughout the universe. Or the understanding that we get is that the same thing happens throughout the universe. We see many houses that are not well developed yet, based on the ignorance, on how ignorant we are, or how they are well developed based on their evolution, state of evolution. So, you know, it's a basic analogy, but helps us understand on what Kardec is touching, and also the information that we'll get later on from higher minds, as we will discuss later on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the key points he says here, or at least I could say really draws attention for us readers, is that sometimes we are, let's say for instance, attached to our loved ones, you know, our mother, father, this idea that society creates for us. And Kardec brings for us that those that are still wandering in darkness can be separated from their quote-unquote, as he says here, objects of affection. Do you think that that is sort of a point in which God uses, or God's creation, he uses us to teach people, to say, look, if you, sort of like a parent to its child, you're a father. So when your children, your daughters are acting up, you say, okay, well, you're not going to have this because you're bad. Do you think that's sort of how God is teaching in his great vast universe, the laws that he's created naturally, that we are kept from our loved ones who possibly more evolved because of our ignorance?
It depends on how we would understand this. Most certainly, yes, we should value what we have in our lives, whether the material things, whether we're discussing the affections of our lives, you know, the loved ones, we should cherish, but we shouldn't put there before anything, and not live a life that depends on it, or that we become that specific moment in our lives. Otherwise, we'll become attached and we'll suffer once perhaps temporarily we don't have it anymore. So yes, it certainly is a teaching to all of us to really understand on how we should live, on how we should mirror ourselves to higher minds that have developed themselves so well, not needing the material as they don't need to.
Because the ultimate goal, we could say, is when we think about these happy worlds, these more perfect worlds that Kardec talks about, the blissful worlds, that he actually uses that term here, it's sort of a longing that we have, right? Sort of like a long-term goal, if we could put it in that sense. Say, okay, we want to reach there. Why? Because it's it's a happy world. It's joyful. We get to be in a totally different state. Here, as Kardec also and St. Augustine refers to, there's sort of like a sensation of a dragging. We have to sort of force ourselves out of these negative habits. So sometimes it feels like we have to work so much, so much. That's why it makes sense when they talk about going from a world of expiation into a world of regeneration. It makes sense, right, Leo? Because you think you're suffering so much and then you need this regenerative moment, which might probably extend for a lifetime for some of us, right?
It's another analogy that we can do, ourselves when we suffer. What the first thing that we want to do, complain, and then we get to that stage that we know what, I'm tired, I don't want to complain anymore. I want to see what's to come forth, and based on the teachings that we receive, that the world of regeneration, once we again expiate and we go through the trials, then we want to go into a state. We naturally will be seeking God in a different way. We'll be seeking these higher minds as well that will help us to regroup or renovate ourselves in a way that we don't want to suffer anymore, that we don't want to fight anymore. And it's fighting against ourselves and fighting against God's law as well, the natural laws, which naturally will bring us to the right path, let's say that way.
So, Leo, would you say it's sort of like hitting a spiritual rock bottom in a way that sometimes some of us have to reach in order to really say, I want to change, I want to do better?
As our enlightened mind says here, we have to go through suffering to value the good things of life. So it may be. Certainly we'll reach that moment and we'll, try to naturally break ourselves free from the suffering, yes.
That's really good stuff. And Kardec actually goes in further in the chapter to explain about these different worlds, and though he says that we can't categorize specifically because there's so many variations, but as a general whole, he said there's basically 5 generalized terms he uses, 5 types of worlds. Number 1 being the primitive world, number 2 being exile, then trial, then regenerative, and then blissful. Throughout the codification, you find different, more or less, terminologies that match up to these things. And so we can say that he says here the primitive worlds really are the worlds where it's the human form, right, Leo? But in terms of the moral or the intellect, there's not much there because they're so busy scrounging for, like the Neanderthals, right? Magna man that anthropology has taught us about, and so forth and so on, right? Would you say?
It's interesting because besides this analogy that we have, not analogy, but the study that we have already with science, that the planet Earth has went through this moment, we also see that we have made some progress. We're not in that stage anymore, that in the suffering stage. And a lot of many of us nowadays, we like to say the world is coming to an end. It's getting worse and worse every single day, and it's not. I mean, if we compare ourselves, with those times, we see that we have made a lot of progress. And just to spice it up a little bit, this conversation. Some time ago, we were having a conversation with a friend who was actually purchasing a home, since we're talking about the many dwellings, and she was very stressed, and we were talking about the whole process, the whole thing, which it can be very stressful depending on what's going on. But then we start remembering those times where back then we didn't have money to pay for the house. You had to go and beat somebody out of the cave and to have that place. So we see that we have made some progress, and then we go into this next stage, which is the stage of that the world is serving as an exile for other minds coming from other locations to help themselves as well as to help progress here on Earth. So it's beautiful ways for us to analyze what we have went through and what is ahead, which is
Earth's destiny, the cause of earthly miseries. And it's so interesting because what they say is that we find on Earth so much wickedness and evil passion, so many miseries and infirmities, right, Leo, of every sort. And one might come to the conclusion that the human species is a very sad thing indeed. And how many times have we heard comments about this, that humanity is sad, like you said, the world's coming to an end, humanity's getting worse, when indeed, no, not really. We've made a lot of progress, right, Leo? Not just the intellectual, but a lot morally, we've made a lot of progress as well. People want more fairness throughout the world. It's not just one particular section of the world, maybe not just the U.S. Everyone wants equality. You see the moral growth in the world, as well as the intellectual. You know, this, let's say, the more intellectuals of the world, the more advanced sections of the world are going to the more impoverished, right?
Right.
Creating schools, reaching out, because charity. Without charity, there's no salvation. Kardec talks about that in a different chapter, but that's important. But we know that Earth's destiny, the cause of earthly miseries, is because we're ignorant. Or, like we also can talk about, right? We've talked about being exiled from other worlds, coming to this world because we weren't morally correct, highly intellectuals coming here and having to suffer because they have a sort of memory. You know, that idea of the lost paradise. You know, when the stories in the Bible, there's always this idea of the lost paradise, the Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden, right?
But besides that, also, what I would like to add, Kirsten, into this conversation,
please.
We see a lot of many spirits reincarnate on Earth, and they start reaching out, doing this altruistic work. You know, on very early ages, and something that we would never have seen before. You know, now it's something common. Obviously, yes, we still have to go and reach out to this information on the web or on TV, because obviously what the media is presenting to us, that is not the main thing. It's only the dark moments or the difficulties of life. But we see this happening more and more. So we see also God's mercy upon all of us, you know, again, letting these higher minds, these altruistic minds, to reincarnate and reach out and go into these other places, these other communities, these other countries, to make a difference and to bring progress upon themselves as
Exactly. It gives a boost to us because it's inspiring when we see, I saw an 11-year-old Indian boy who was inspired through watching things on TV to go and create an altruistic outreach program for, and you think, who is this 11-year-old boy?
Right.
And, you know, out of all the other 11-year-olds, he just decided, he went, created this, his parents supported him, he created it. It's amazing because you're like, wow, he's 11, but he is prepared spirit, definitely. And touching back again to that perspective that some people, maybe some of us even have in our intimate lives, right? We think, man, the world is so bad. And Kardec brings to us why that perspective does have truth to it, because it's like this. For those of us who work in a hospital, we see nothing but sick people. And we go, man, there's a lot of sick people in the world. Well, that's because look at what you're looking at. This earth is like a hospital. We've come here to get better. So you're going to have what in the hospital? Sick people. So Kardec brings that to us here because he says here, in a hospital, one sees only the sick or the maimed. In the penitentiary, one sees all sorts of turpitude and vices, of course. So, dear listeners, friends on the web, you can go dive into this chapter, learn more about the world you live in and other worlds, broaden your perspective. Wouldn't you say, Leo, it's important for us to change our perspectives as we give our final thoughts here?
Perspective, perception. It's very important for us to change ourselves in whatever situation we are. We can be in a very dark moment, difficult moment, and try to analyze and say, why am I going through this? Why is humanity going through this? Why my community? Why, you know, I'm dealing with certain individuals in my life. And once you start analyzing, try to take yourselves out of state and say, you know what, let me analyze the picture. I think it gives us an opportunity for us to be the third person, if you will. It will give us an ability for us to be more centered, more calm, and to, because we're still reacting. Unfortunately, we're still reacting, to react it, you know, to the situation in a different and much more calm way. So yes, perception and analyzing the whole thing is it's a key moment for us in our lives.
Absolutely, and with the words of St. Augustine, because those of us who research a little bit about St. Augustine, we know that he worked diligently on himself all the time. looking at a different perspective, getting to know himself more, and that is part of the proposal. One of the reasons why you should go read this chapter, the entire book in and of itself, to change your perspective, bring more peace into your lives, and hopefully into the lives of others. I'm Kirsten DeMello with the Spiritist Moment.
And I'm Leonardo Vieira.
And have a very blessed day.